Hello, everyone. I'm taking over from here. I'm Nadine Metzger. I'm a medical historian, and I'm working at the University of Erlangen, Nürnberg in Germany. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Oliver Overwien. I think there's still a microphone to be muted. Thank you, Sarah. So, Oliver. Oliver is a classical philologist based at Berlin's Humboldt University, where he is a tenured assistant professor for classical Greek philology at Philipp van der Eyck's Humboldt Professorship for Classics and History of Science. Before that, he worked for the Corpus Medicorum Graecorum project, editing Hippocrates de Humoribus. His research is concerned with ancient medicine and its later traditions in plural, Greek, Arabic, Latin, and his editions of Greek medical texts are distinct in that they include the Arabic manuscript tradition as well. This is both true for his edition of Hippocrates de Humoribus and his latest project, the edition and translation of two closely related and quite special texts from later ancient Alexandria, one transmitted in Greek and one in Arabic translation. These two lie at the center of his 2019 book, Medizinische Lehrwerke aus dem spätantiken Alexandria, discussed here. The so-called School of Alexandria has long been a staple in our picture of later ancient medical teaching. It is known that medically inclined students flocked to Alexandria to study with the iatrosophistes, at least until Alexandria came under Arabic control. One even has a vague understanding which texts they read and to which their teachers dedicated commentaries. But what is new in Oliver's book is that it enables us to gain some understanding of how they learned their Galen. They took all the sometimes difficult and complex thoughts and broke them down into easily remembered diareses, meaning a subdivision of terms graphically expressed by tree structures. Therefore, Oliver's book not only sheds light onto the academic teaching methods of later ancient iatrosophistes, but highlights texts in diagram form as their own didactic genre. This didactic format cannot be overestimated as it shaped the minds of generations of medical men in late antiquity and beyond. Now I give over to you, Oliver, for your presentation. And I remember all the attendees here that to put questions to Oliver, please write them into the question and answer box. Thank you, Oliver.
So Nadine, thank you very much for your kind words, for your kind introduction. And before I will start with my presentation, Petros, let me first repeat what many speakers before me said or have said. This book conference is a really good idea. So I will show you some PDF files. So I hope it will be a little bit easier to follow my presentation. So, as the title of my book indicates, it is about medical school treatises from late antique Alexandria. Before I will speak about its content, let me first say a few words about the school context, which I have been dealing with for several years. In late antique Alexandria, several medical teachers were active, which are usually called iatrosophists in modern research. To them belonged people like Gessius, John of Alexandria, Palladius, Stephanus, and others. These iatrosophists gave their lessons in the period from the end of the 5th century to the beginning or the middle of the 7th century. The teaching was mainly based on text of Hippocrates of Kos and Galen of Pergamon. For modern eyes, it seems rather strange that they relied on medical authorities who, roughly speaking, lived 400 or 1000 years earlier. It is not much that we know about their lessons. How many students did they have? Did they work at the same time or one after another? Were they paid by the city or did they work as freelancers? At least we can specify their kind of teaching a little more precisely. The lectures they gave about the Hippocratic and Galenic texts were at the center of their teaching. In addition, they created different kinds of textbooks, among which were question and answer texts, commentaries, and monographs on certain medical topics. It can be assumed that this kind of teaching was one of the most demanding of its time. Probably that was also one of the reasons that the lessons were quite influential. Not only did students come from all over the world to Alexandria, but also an offspring was created in Ravenna, in the north of Italy, in the middle or the end of the 6th century. Some centuries earlier, Sergius of Resh Einar translated text that he got to know during his studies in Alexandria into Syriac. His translation spread across the whole Sasanian kingdom. Furthermore, many lectures and school books reached the Arabic-speaking world in the 9th century and later on the Latin West. We are still a long way from being able to grasp the exact routes of transmission, but it is quite evident that the Iatrosophists influenced the medical teaching in the Latin West and Arabic-speaking world for many centuries. It is still unclear whether the lessons of the Iatrosophists had a fortleben in Byzantium. The topic of my book deals with a specific aspect of these lessons, namely the so-called Tabulae Vindobonenses and Summaria Alexandrinorum. For this, one has to know that both of them are related to those texts of the aforementioned Galen that belonged to the Alexandrian curriculum. In my book, I have focused on the Tabulae and Summaria on the Galenic text that introduced the Alexandrian medical studies, de sectis, or on the medical groups. First of all, I have translated both texts into German. In addition, I have made an edition of the Tabulae Vindobonensis. The corresponding version of the Summaria has already been edited. However, this was only the starting point of my study, as I also wanted to find out what purpose both texts served. I will begin with the Tabulae Vindobonenses. The Tabulae Vindobonenses are only preserved in the Codex Vindobonensis Medicus Graecus 60. The geographical background of this codex was the reason why the content is called Tabulae Vindobonenses in modern research. The title is therefore a modern invention. If they had a title, it must have been Dihaireses, that means divisions. The reason for this becomes clear when one looks at the first entry in the Vienna manuscript. As one can see, the Tabulae Vindobonenses are tree diagrams in which a certain expression, in this case he iatrike, is divided into several subcategories. The relation between the different levels of the division is organized vertically along lines. It is said here that some people divide medicine into 2 parts, others divide it into 5 parts. The 2 parts of medicine are theory and practice, while its 5 parts are the theory of natural things, the theory of causes, the theory of symptoms, hygiene, and therapy. The corresponding passage in the Summaria Alexandrinorum is presented in the following way. The content is largely the same, as medicine is divided into the same categories and subcategories here. However, there are 2 obvious differences. First, the Summaria Alexandrinorum are not tree diagrams, but composed as a continuous text. Second, the Summaria Alexandrinorum are written in Arabic. Nevertheless, both texts had the same origin and served the same purpose, as I have tried to show in my book. First, it is well known that the Summaria Alexandrinorum have not been written by an Arabic scholar, but are based on a Greek source. They are therefore the product of a translation process. If one compares their content with that of the Tabulae Vindobonenses, one will find many passages which are identical. Their content only differs significantly in a few instances. It follows from that the lost Greek source of the Summaria Alexandrinorum is not identical, but very similar to the Tabulae Vindobonenses. Second, the outer form of the Summaria Alexandrinorum has been revised either by the translator or by a subsequent user. Originally, they were also in the form of tree diagrams, as several philological characteristics prove. The transformation from tree diagrams into a continuous text could be easily done and is several times attested in the Greek and Arabic tradition. Furthermore, the text had no title, or at least it wasn't Summaria Alexandrinorum, for the Iatrosophists did not see themselves as a unit, Alexandrinorum, the Alexandrians, and were not referred to as such by others. In other words, originally, the Summaria Alexandrinorum had not only the same content as the Tabulae Vindobonenses, but also the same form, which means tree diagrams without title, and were used in the same context and for the same purpose. Third, what was the purpose of the Tabulae Vindobonenses and Summaria Alexandrinorum? The Tabulae Vindobonenses and Summaria Alexandrinorum and the Galenic text De Sectis contain around 100 tree diagrams of medical topics like tumors, seasons, drugs, aspects indicating evacuation, signs for a wound, anatomy, and so on. I said that they are compilations of Galenic content. So, are they related to the Galenic text? Surely not. It can be shown that they were closely related to the lectures that the Iatrosophists gave about the Galenic text. For many passages from the Tabulae Vindobonenses and Summaria are not found in the Galenic original, only in the lectures. In addition, in contrast to the Galenic original, many passages of the lectures were also structured according to the method of division, diaeresis. Why? The function of the diaeresis is to define words. Since the teachers always had to explain medical terms during their lectures, they resorted to this didactic means. Fourth, the Tabulae Vindobonenses, so both the Tabulae Vindobonenses and the Summaria Alexandrinorum were used as a didactic tool in combination with the lectures. Presumably, it has to be imagined as the Iatrosophists emphasizing, or rather defining, certain aspects of Galen's original in their lectures according to the method of division, diaeresis. These divisions then were collected in the Tabulae Vindobonenses in Summaria Alexandrinorum to be learned and memorized by the students. The form of the tree diagram was very suitable for this, as it is very monotonous and schematic on the one hand, and clearly visualizes its content on the other. To be honest, the Tabulae Vindobonenses and the Summaria Alexandrinorum are not Homer or Sophocles. They are quite boring. Nonetheless, they are worth exploring as they give us an idea of how medicine was taught in late antiquity and many centuries later. Thank you very much.